He spent 11 years keeping her building safe. She spent 11 seconds throwing him away. At 8:47 on a rainy Tuesday night, Logan Hayes, former Navy SEAL, single father, quiet man who never asked for anything, handed back his security badge without a word while 30 employees watched in silence. The new billionaire CEO called him obsolete, called him a relic, said the future had no room for men like him. She was wrong. Because 2 hours later, armed men stormed Sterling Tower, and the only person who could stop them was the man she'd just fired. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and follow this channel so you never miss a story that'll keep you up at night. Drop a like, and tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The rain came down the way it always did in late October. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just cold and relentless and indifferent to whatever was happening beneath it. It hit the glass face of Sterling Tower in sheets, streaked down 47 floors of polished surface, and pooled in the gutters along Fifth Avenue where a handful of cabs idled with their lights on, waiting for fares that hadn't come yet. Logan Hayes noticed the rain the way he noticed most things, quietly, without making a production of it. He was standing at the security station on the lobby level, running his end-of-shift check the way he always did. Camera feeds, access log, patrol schedule for the overnight team. Same routine he'd done for 11 years, same battered notebook, same thermos of lukewarm coffee that he never quite finished before it went cold. He was in the middle of logging a note about the East Freight elevator. It had been making a grinding sound for 3 weeks and nobody from maintenance had come to look at it, when the lobby doors opened and the click of heels on marble announced that something was about to change. He didn't look up immediately. He finished the sentence he was writing first. Vivian Sterling moved the way people moved when they'd spent their entire adult lives being watched. Not with arrogance exactly, but with the kind of absolute certainty that came from never having walked into a room and been ignored. She was 30 years old and had inherited a company worth $4 billion 6 weeks ago, when her father had his second stroke, and the board, after a week of closed-door meetings, concluded that the only person they could trust not to burn the whole thing down was the woman who'd spent the last 4 years building a competing AI security firm from nothing. She was flanked by 2 people Logan didn't recognize. A man in his 40s with a tablet and a look on his face like he was calculating the liquidation value of everything he passed. And a woman in her 30s with a headset around her neck who kept glancing at her phone. Behind them, at a respectful distance, came Adrian Mercer. Logan knew Adrian, 46 years old, chief operating officer, the kind of man who remembered your birthday and your wife's name and your kids' ages and used all of it with the precise efficiency of someone who understood that warmth was a currency. He'd been at Sterling Group for 9 years. He'd hired Logan, actually. Or at least he'd signed off on the hire. He gave Logan a nod as he passed, and Logan returned it. Vivian Sterling stopped in front of the security station. Logan set down his pen. "You're Hayes," she said, not a question. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him the way you looked at a piece of furniture you were trying to decide whether to keep or replace. Logan had been looked at that way before, in different contexts, by different people. He kept his face still. "I reviewed the overnight staffing reports this afternoon," she said. "I also reviewed the security system audit that my team completed last week." She paused, and something in the pause felt prepared, like she'd rehearsed the rhythm of it. "We're moving to full AI integrated security management starting in 30 days. The manual security positions are being eliminated in phases. Yours is in the first phase." Logan said nothing. The man with the tablet held it out toward him. "If you sign here, we can process your severance this week. 60 days. Logan looked at the tablet. He looked at Vivian. "I filed 14 reports about the new system," he said. "Vulnerability assessments. 11 of them were about the east and north camera arrays. The integration protocol has blind spots that—" "I've read your reports," Vivian said. "Then you know that the—" "Mr. Hayes." Her voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. "I've read your reports. My technical team has reviewed them. We appreciate the thoroughness, but you're a security guard, not a systems architect. The concerns you raised were addressed in the implementation updates." Logan looked at her for a moment. "They weren't," he said. "The East Freight Corridor still has a 17-second gap in coverage every time the elevator cycles. The maintenance access panel on sublevel 2 can be opened with a standard bypass tool that's been available online since 2019. And whoever told you the biometric readers on floors 30 through 40 are properly calibrated hasn't actually tested them under load. I have. They fail when more than 4 are active simultaneously. Vivian's expression didn't change, but he saw something move behind her eyes. Not doubt, not concern, just something more like the particular impatience of a person who had decided something and found the objection inconvenient. "Your badge," she said. The lobby had gone quiet. Logan became aware, in the peripheral way you became aware of things when your training kicked in, that there were people watching. The overnight cleaning crew had slowed their cart near the elevator bank. 2 junior analysts who'd been heading for the exit had stopped. Even the security cameras, his cameras, the ones he'd calibrated himself, seemed to have oriented their small glass eyes toward the desk. Logan reached down. He unclipped the badge from his lanyard. He held it out. Vivian took it. "Thank you for your service," she said, and it sounded like something you said when you couldn't think of anything else. Logan picked up his notebook. He picked up his thermos. He walked to the coat rack by the back corridor and got his jacket, a navy blue Carhartt that Sophie had helped him pick out 3 Christmases ago, back when she was 5 and had very strong opinions about jacket colors. He didn't say anything else. He walked out through the service entrance because the main lobby still had people in it, and he didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable by making them feel like they had to look at him or look away from him. He went down the ramp to the parking structure. He found his truck, a 10-year-old F-150 with a cracked taillight he kept meaning to fix, and a back seat that currently held 3 library books Sophie had asked him to return, a spare jacket, and a soccer ball. He sat in the truck for a moment. The heater fan made a sound like distant static. Outside, the rain found its way down the parking garage ramp in thin, wandering rivers. He thought about Sophie's school, Riverside Academy. It cost more than he should have been spending, but she was thriving there in a way she hadn't been at her last school, where she'd spent 2 months being called weird by girls who weren't interested in the periodic table or the engineering books she carried around in her backpack. At Riverside, she had a teacher who got it, and 2 friends who got it, and a science club that met on Wednesday afternoons. The tuition payment was due in 11 days. The amount was not nothing. He started the truck. He had savings. Not a lot, but enough to cover the immediate gap while he figured out what was next. He'd been in worse positions. He'd been in much worse positions. He would make calls in the morning, reach out to a few people he knew, start working the problem. That was what you did. You identified the problem. You worked it. He pulled out of the parking structure onto 5th Avenue and turned south toward home. The radio came on automatically when the truck connected. He'd set it to a news station years ago out of habit, the kind of background noise that let him stay oriented to the world without having to actively seek it out. He wasn't really listening as he drove. He was thinking about Sophie, about whether she'd still be awake when he got home, about whether she'd have eaten the dinner he'd left in the refrigerator, or whether she'd have decided, as she sometimes did, that cereal was a more reasonable option. He was 3 blocks from the tower when the broadcast changed. Not the content, the tone. That particular shift in register that news anchors made when something was happening right now, when the script had been abandoned in favor of whatever was coming through their earpiece. Reports of an active security situation at Sterling Tower in Midtown, where witnesses describe multiple armed individuals entering the building approximately, "We are getting confirmation now. The NYPD is responding. We have sources are telling us there are people still inside the building. This is developing. We'll have more." Logan pulled over. He sat very still for approximately 4 seconds. Then he looked at his rearview mirror, at the rain-blurred image of Sterling Tower 40 stories tall and lit up against the dark sky 3 blocks behind him. He thought about the East Freight Corridor and its 17-second coverage gap. He thought about the maintenance access panel on sublevel 2 and the bypass tool that had been available online since 2019. He thought about 30-something employees who'd been working late when he left. The cleaning crew near the elevator bank. The 2 junior analysts. He thought about Vivian Sterling, who had read his reports and decided her technical team knew better. He put the truck in reverse. The U-turn he made was not elegant. The truck was too big and the street was too narrow, and a cab driver leaned on his horn as Logan swung around. He didn't care. He was already mapping the building in his head. Not the lobby entrance, not the parking structure, Those would be watched. The steam tunnel access from the building on 47th, the utility conduit that connected to Sterling's sub-basement, the one that had been built as a contingency during the original construction in the 80s, the one that appeared on exactly one set of plans that lived in a filing cabinet in the city's infrastructure archive. He knew about it because he'd spent 11 years reading every document about this building he could find. He knew about the East Corridor gap and the sublevel 2 panel and the biometric failures under load because he'd spent 11 years watching, checking, documenting. He'd spent 11 years being told he was thorough. He'd spent 11 years filing reports that ended up in someone's unread folder. His phone was already in his hand. He dialed his neighbor, Mrs. Okonkwo, who was Sophie's emergency contact and kept a spare key and had told him roughly 1,000 times that she didn't mind if he called late. It rang twice. Logan? Her voice was alert in the way older people's voices were alert at night. She'd probably been watching the news. I need you to stay with Sophie tonight, he said. I don't know how long. Can you do that? A pause. I already saw the news. That's your building. Yeah. Logan. Sophie's probably asleep. She had school today. Don't wake her up unless she wakes on her own. He pulled up to the curb 2 blocks from the tower, cut the engine, and looked at the rain coming down in the headlights. Tell her I'll be home in the morning. You be careful, Mrs. Okonkwo said, which was not a question. I'll be careful, he said, and hung up. He reached under the seat. There was a small emergency kit back there. Standard stuff he'd carried for years, maintained out of habit. He also had his old tactical flashlight, the one he'd had since the teams. He checked it. Good batteries. He got out of the truck. He left his thermos on the seat. He kept the notebook because he knew the layout was in there. The annotated floor plans he'd sketched over years of walking the building, the maintenance schedules, the camera positions. He pulled up his collar against the rain and started moving. Not running. Running attracted attention. He walked the way he had been trained to walk in environments where being noticed was the thing that got you killed. With purpose, steadily, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 3 blocks, 2, 1. The alley behind the building on 47th was exactly where he remembered it. The grate over the steam tunnel access was exactly where it had always been. The padlock on it was not a problem. Logan Hayes went into the ground. Above him, 47 floors of glass and steel and marble and screaming and terror and multi-million-dollar technology that had just stopped working the way it was supposed to. Behind him, his truck sat in the rain with a thermos of cold coffee and 3 overdue library books. Somewhere across the city, an 8-year-old girl named Sophie was asleep and didn't know yet that her father, who had once protected the highest value assets in the United States military, had just gone back to work. He had cracked ribs he was going to earn tonight. But that was later. Right now, he was moving through the dark, and in the dark was where he'd always been most himself. The steam tunnel smelled the way it always had. Hot metal, old concrete, and something vaguely chemical that Logan had never been able to identify in 11 years of knowing it existed. He moved through it crouched, flashlight off, one hand trailing the right wall because he didn't need the light. He'd walked this route in his head enough times that his body knew the distances the way it knew the distance from his bed to his daughter's room in the dark, by feel, by count, by the particular quality of the air changing as spaces opened and closed around him. 42 steps to the first junction, left, then 28 more to the access shaft. He counted. Above him, muffled by concrete and distance, he could hear something. Not clearly, just the compressed suggestion of noise, the kind that reached you through walls and floors and told you things were happening without telling you what. He kept moving. The access shaft was a vertical climb of about 12 feet, iron rungs bolted into the wall that he tested one at a time before trusting his weight to them. The third rung from the bottom wobbled the same way it had wobbled for 6 years. He'd reported it. The work order had gone to facilities. He doubted it had ever been addressed. He came up through a utility closet on sub-level 2, the kind of room that held pipe manifolds and electrical panels and smelled like dust and old oil and was never on any tour. He pressed his ear to the door for 30 seconds before opening it. The corridor outside was empty. Sub-level 2 was storage and infrastructure. Mechanical rooms, the building's original server room that hadn't been primary since 2018. and the maintenance passages that connected the building's original 1987 bones to the additions that had been bolted on in 2003 and again in 2011. Logan knew every one of them. He'd walk them on slow nights with his notebook and a flashlight, not because anyone asked him to, but because he believed that knowing a building was part of protecting it, the same way knowing terrain was part of surviving it. He moved east along the sublevel corridor, stopped at a junction, listened. Voices. 2 floors up, maybe 3. Not the compressed panic of hostages, the flat, task-oriented cadence of people working. He recognized the register. He'd heard it before, in different languages, in different parts of the world. Men with a plan, executing it. He needed information before he moved. He needed to know how many, where they were concentrated, what they were there for. Going in without a picture was how you made things worse instead of better. There was a mechanical room on sublevel 2 where the building's original intercom infrastructure terminated. A relic from before everything went wireless, a panel of switches and speaker feeds that connected to ports throughout the building. Most people who worked at Sterling had no idea it existed. Logan had found it in his second year and had included it in his vulnerability documentation, flagging it as both a potential security weakness and a potential asset depending on who was using it. He found the room. The panel was exactly where it had always been, bolted to the wall behind a water heater, dusty, the labels on half the switches faded to illegibility. He didn't need the labels. He knew which feeds went where. He clicked on the switch for the executive floor, 41st, and listened. Static. Then voices. East stairwell is clear. We have confirmed positions on 22, 30, and the lobby. Tell Reyes to hold the elevator shafts. I don't want anyone moving between floors without... Logan counted. Lobby, 22nd, 30th, 41st. At minimum 4 operational positions, probably more. He switched feeds. 37th floor, nothing. 25th, the sound of someone crying quietly and someone else telling them in a low voice to stay down, stay quiet. Employees sheltering. He switched again. Main security control room, 44th floor. He'd reported, twice, that the main control room's intercom port had never been disconnected from the legacy system. Both reports had gone into the same unread folder as everything else. System is holding. Mercer said we had a 90-minute window before the police get access authorization from the building's digital systems. We're at 41 minutes. Confirm status on the server room. A pause. Another voice, closer to the speaker. Vault access team is still working the override. It's taking longer than projected. The manual protocols weren't in the schematics Mercer gave us. Then tell them to work faster. We didn't come here for the rocks. Logan stood very still in the mechanical room with his hand on the intercom panel. We didn't come here for the rocks. The diamonds were on display in the 38th floor gallery. 12 stones collectively valued at somewhere over $90 million. The centerpiece of the exhibition that had been Vivian Sterling's first major move as CEO. Every news outlet in the city had covered it. The security around it had been the subject of considerable planning and considerable expense. And whoever was running this operation had just told him, without knowing he was listening, that the diamonds weren't the point. He needed a radio. He needed to be able to communicate and move at the same time, which meant he needed to get to the emergency communications cabinet on sub-level 1, where there were 4 handheld radios in a charging rack that had been part of the building's original emergency systems and had never been integrated into the new AI network, because the new AI network used a proprietary frequency and nobody had gotten around to decommissioning the old hardware. He moved. The emergency cabinet was where he'd left it, metaphorically. He hadn't touched it, hadn't needed to, but he'd checked it on every quarterly maintenance walk for 11 years, because that was the kind of thing he checked. 2 of the 4 radios were fully charged. He took both, pocketed one, held the other, switched to channel 7, the frequency he'd documented in his vulnerability report as the building's original emergency channel, the one the new system didn't monitor. Then he went to find people. The 22nd floor housed the accounting department and, more relevantly right now, the server room annex that had been converted in 2022 from storage to a secondary data hub. Logan had noted the conversion in his files. He'd also noted that the annex had a drop ceiling that connected via a maintenance crawlspace to the HVAC trunk lines that ran throughout the floor. He accessed the crawlspace from a utility room on 21 and moved through it on his elbows and knees, which was about as pleasant as it sounded for a man with old injuries that complained in cold weather. The metal flexed and ticked under his weight. He moved slowly, distributing his weight, minimizing sound. Through the grill of a ceiling vent, he could see the accounting bullpen below. 11 people, mostly down behind desks, a few against the interior wall. One man in a suit who appeared to be having a very quiet, very controlled panic attack. Hand over his mouth, eyes closed, chest working too fast. A woman in her 50s who was the calmest person in the room, sitting with her back straight and her hands in her lap, watching the single-armed man near the door with the focused attention of someone taking inventory. The armed man was young, late 20s, Logan guessed. He was holding his weapon with the slightly too rigid grip of someone who'd practiced but hadn't operated. He kept glancing at his radio, waiting for something. Logan looked at the room's geometry. One exit that the guard was covering, a secondary emergency exit at the far end of the bullpen, the door that led to the stairwell. He traced the path from the crawl space to a position above the emergency exit. He moved. It took him 4 minutes to reposition, which felt very long and was actually very short. He came down through an access panel in the ceiling of a supply closet adjacent to the emergency exit stairwell door, stepped out into the stairwell itself, and opened the door from the bullpen side quietly enough that only the woman who'd been watching was looking in the right direction when it happened. She saw him. Her eyes went wide. He put a finger to his lips. She held very still. He held up the radio, pointed to his ear, mimed speaking quietly, then held up 2 fingers and pointed toward the bullpen door, toward the guard. Then he pointed to the emergency exit door and made a small beckoning gesture. She looked at him for a moment. He could see her deciding. He was a man in a wet Carhartt jacket and work pants who had just come out of a ceiling, and he was asking her to trust him. She nudged the man next to her, whispered something he couldn't hear, nodded toward the door. He watched them begin to move, slowly, carefully, one by one, using the tall filing cabinets along the interior wall as visual cover from the guard's position. The man who'd been having the panic attack looked up when the woman touched his shoulder, and something in his face shifted when she pointed toward the door. Not calm, exactly, but focused. Sometimes that was enough. The guard's radio crackled. He turned toward it, distracted. 11 people came through the emergency exit door in the time it took the guard's radio conversation to last. Logan was already moving them down the stairwell, keeping his voice barely above a murmur. Sublevel 1. There's a maintenance corridor that exits onto 47th Street through the building next door. Stay on the right wall. Don't use your phones until you're outside. Who are you? The woman asked. Her name tag said Patricia, accounts receivable. Used to work here, Logan said. Keep moving. She looked at him for another half second. You're the security guard, the one they fired tonight. Yeah. And you came back. Keep moving, Patricia. She moved. They all moved. Logan counted them through the sub-level door and gave them the route verbally, once, clearly, the way he'd given directions in environments where repetition wasn't available. They went. He watched until the last one turned the corner, then he turned and went back up. He found 7 more people on the 25th floor in a conference room, the ones he'd heard through the intercom, and 3 executives on 30 who'd barricaded themselves in a corner office using a heavy mahogany desk they'd apparently dragged in from the hallway, which Logan thought showed admirable initiative even if the desk wouldn't have stopped much. He got them all moving through routes that kept them away from the floors where the operation was concentrated. 22, the main control room on 44, and whatever was happening in the basement server room. He treated a woman with a cut on her forearm. Glass from something that had broken, not serious but bleeding enough to need pressure, using the basic kit in his jacket pocket. He held the gauze there himself for 2 minutes because her hands were shaking too badly. You're going to be fine, he told her. How do you know? She said. It wasn't hostile, it was a real question. Because you're walking and talking and asking questions, he said. That's 3 things working in your favor. She almost laughed. Not quite. He sent her with the executives. By his count, he'd gotten 21 people out through the sub-level route and was working on a second exit path. The freight elevator shaft on the north side could be manually operated from the mechanical room if you knew the override sequence, and he did, when his radio clicked twice in the pattern that meant incoming on a monitored channel. He froze. Then a voice came through. Not the attacker's frequency, his frequency, channel 7. Hello, is someone on this channel? I found this frequency I'm in the executive suite, floor 41. If anyone can hear this, please. Logan raised the radio. I hear you, he said. Who is this? A pause. The sound of breathing. Vivian Sterling. He closed his eyes for approximately 1 second. Are you injured? No, I'm behind the credenza in my office. There are 2 men outside the door. I've been here for... A pause. He heard her pull herself together, the audible work of it. I've been here for maybe 30 minutes. My phone doesn't work. They did something to the cell signal, but I found the old emergency radio in the cabinet, and I figured... You figured right. He was already moving, heading for the stairwell that would take him up. The cabinet on the 41st floor east wall. I filed that radio's existence in a security report in 2021. I'm glad someone finally read it. Another pause. Hayes? Yeah. You're in the building. Yeah. I fired you 3 hours ago. 2 hours and 14 minutes, he said. Keep your voice low. What can you hear outside the door? She was quiet for a moment, and he heard the quality of the silence change as she apparently moved closer to the door to listen. 2 men. They're talking about something. A server. A vault. One of them keeps saying they're behind schedule. What floor is the main server vault on? Sub-level 3, but it's biometric. It requires... Does it require Adrian Mercer's credentials? The silence that followed was a different kind. How do you know about Adrian? Her voice had gone flat in a way that told him something. Logan took the stairs 2 at a time, moving as quietly as a large man could move on metal staircases, which was not very quietly, but quietly enough if the people above you were focused on other things. Because I've been doing this job for 11 years, he said, keeping his voice low, and I write things down. How many access points does the sub-level 3 vault have? 2. The main door and the emergency access from the infrastructure corridor. The infrastructure corridor connects to the original steam tunnels. I don't know, probably. The building is from the... It does. I've walked it. He stopped on the 39th floor landing, pressed against the wall, and listened. Footsteps above. 1 person, moving in a regular pattern. Guard rotation. Ms. Sterling, I need you to stay very still and very quiet for about 20 minutes. I need to get to your floor, but I can't go directly. Can you do that? Yes. No hesitation this time, which was different from 3 hours ago, when every word she said to him had the texture of certainty. This was a different kind of yes. Not confident, but committed. Yes, I can do that. Good. And Ms. Sterling, what? When I get there, I'm going to knock on your office door 3 times, pause, then twice. Don't open it for anything else. Okay. Okay, he said, and moved. Getting past the guard on 40 required patience more than anything else. The guard was stationed at the main elevator bank, which meant the stairwell door at the far end of the floor was unwatched. Logan came up through the stairwell, opened the door to the 41st floor 3 inches, confirmed the sight lines, and moved along the interior wall to Vivian's office, using the glass-walled conference room as visual cover. He knocked. 3. Pause. 2. The door opened almost immediately, which meant she'd been standing right behind it, which meant whatever composure she'd presented on the radio had been maintained at some cost. She looked at him. He looked at her. She was still in the clothes she'd been wearing in the lobby. A charcoal blazer, dark slacks, heels she'd apparently removed and was holding in one hand. Her hair, which had been immaculate 3 hours ago, was not immaculate. There was a small cut on her chin that she'd been pressing a folded tissue against. Her eyes were steady, but her jaw was tight in a way that said she'd been holding it tight for a while. "You came back," she said. I got about 3 blocks, he said. Move away from the door. She moved. He came in, closed the door softly, went to the window. 41st floor, 5th Avenue below, the red and blue strobes of what looked like a significant police response spread across 3 blocks. SWAT vehicles, command units. They hadn't made entry yet. He knew why. Sterling Tower's AI integration meant the building's own systems controlled access, and if someone had compromised those systems, any attempt at forced entry risked triggering protocols that would lock every exit and seal every elevator. He'd written a report about that too. Your AI security system is compromised, he said. They've got the camera feeds looping. Electronic locks are either disabled or under their control. The biometrics on the executive floors are running on a backup protocol that's 17 months out of date. Vivian stared at him. How do you? Because it's all in my reports. He wasn't angry when he said it. Just tired, the way you were tired when you'd been right about something for a long time and the validation felt like the worst possible outcome. The system had gaps that your technical team said were addressed. They weren't. I documented every one of them. She sat down on the edge of her desk. Something moved across her face that wasn't quite guilt and wasn't quite shame, but was somewhere in that territory. What do they actually want? She asked. The diamonds aren't the target. He took out his notebook, opened it to a page he'd been working in his head since the intercom room on sublevel 2. Whatever's in your sublevel 3 server vault. Encrypted financial data, proprietary systems, client records, something worth considerably more than $90 million in rocks. That's what this is about. She was quiet for a moment. The financial architecture, she said slowly. We hold encrypted portfolio data for about 40 institutional clients. The key structures alone. She stopped. It's billions. If someone had the data and the decryption keys, they could... Who has access to sublevel 3? She looked at him. He's sweet. 3 board members and Adrian Mercer. This time the silence lasted longer. He's been my COO for 9 years, she said, and her voice was careful in the way voices got when they were handling something that hadn't finished breaking yet. He mentored me when I came into the company. He told me the security upgrades were fully implemented. He told me your concerns were... She stopped again. Overblown, Logan said. Yeah, I know what he told you. He watched her put it together. Not slowly. She was not a slow person. He'd seen that much in the lobby 3 hours ago, even when she was wrong. She put it together quickly, and what it cost her to do that was visible in a brief, unguarded moment that she smoothed over almost immediately. Every fake IT contractor, she said, the maintenance requests that never went through normal channels. You documented those. All of it, 14 months of documentation. He held up the notebook. This isn't a wireless network. It doesn't have a vulnerability. Everything I saw and noted is in here, and nobody has ever asked me for it. Vivian looked at the notebook. Then she looked at him. Not the way she'd looked at him in the lobby, not the piece of furniture assessment. Something different, something that had the beginnings of what it might look like when a person realized they'd badly misread something important. What do we do? She said. Logan was already thinking about sublevel 3, about the infrastructure corridor, about the emergency manual lockdown system that had been built into the original construction and that he'd found documented in the building's 1987 engineering blueprints on a research visit to the city infrastructure archive. The lockdown system used physical steel barriers, hydraulic, mechanical, independent of any electronic network, that could seal the underground vault completely. It had never been used. It had never been upgraded. It had never been connected to the building's modern systems, which meant it had also never been connected to whatever the attackers had compromised. It was the most old-fashioned thing in a 47-floor monument to the modern. There's a manual lockdown system in the original infrastructure, he said. Physical steel barriers, hydraulic triggers. It predates everything your AI network runs on. I found the documentation for it 4 years ago and included it in a report as a potential last resort asset. I don't know anything about a manual lockdown. I know. Almost nobody does. That's the point. He looked at her. I need to get to the activation panel on sublevel 3 without being seen. You need to stay here and keep this radio channel open. I'll talk you through the secondary activation. There's a backup trigger in the original building supervisor's office on sub-level 1. If I can't reach the primary panel, you're going to have to do it." She looked at him steadily. "Walk me through it." He did. Quickly, precisely, without assuming she wouldn't understand, because she was clearly someone who understood things when they were explained without condescension. She asked 2 sharp questions and retained the answers. He noted both. "One more thing," he said, and moved to the window again, looking down at the police response. The command structure would be working on a solution, but they were working on it from the outside. He had maybe 30 minutes before the situation changed in ways he couldn't predict. The operational leader, whoever's coordinating the floors, said they had a 90-minute window before police could access the building's systems. "We're past the halfway point. When that window closes, they're going to move toward extraction. That's when things get unpredictable." Meaning I need to move now." He looked at her. 3 knocks, pause, 2, that's me. "Anything else, you stay quiet." She nodded. He went to the door. His ribs ached from the crawl space. His knees ached from the stairs. His back had an opinion about the steam tunnel that he was choosing to ignore. He was 37 years old, and he'd spent 11 years doing a job that involved walking circuits and writing reports. And his body was informing him, politely but firmly, that certain things had softened in the interim. He went anyway. "Hayes." Her voice caught him at the door. He turned. "Why?" she said. "Why did you come back?" He thought about Sophie asleep in her room across the city, about Mrs. Okonkwo sitting in the chair by the window, watching the news, about the woman from accounting whose hands had been shaking while he held gauze to her arm, about 21 people who were outside right now in the rain, alive and okay, because he'd known which ceiling panels were accessible and which routes avoided the guard positions. "There were people in the building," he said. "That's not the whole answer." He considered her for a moment. "No," he said. "It's not." He opened the door. "Keep the channel open." He moved back into the dark of the 41st floor corridor, and behind him the door closed softly, and Vivian Sterling sat alone in her office with a radio in her hand and the slow, heavy weight of understanding settling over her like something she should have picked up a long time ago. Logan had 12 floors to descend, a compromised AI security system to outmaneuver, and a manual lockdown panel to reach before a criminal operation he'd been trying to warn people about for 14 months completed the job that one of the company's most trusted executives had spent a year building toward. He moved. Below him, in the sub-level 3 vault, something was about to go very wrong for the people who thought they'd planned for everything. They hadn't planned for the man who knew the building better than anyone alive, because they'd made the same mistake Vivian Sterling had made 3 hours ago. They'd assumed he didn't matter. The stairwell from 41 down to sub-level 3 was 12 floors of descent that Logan made in segments, stopping at each landing to listen before moving through. His ribs were talking to him now. A dull, persistent complaint on his left side where he'd caught the edge of a pipe in the crawl space on 22. Not broken. Probably not broken. He'd had broken ribs before, and they announced themselves more dramatically. These were bruised, maybe cracked, the kind of injury that would feel worse tomorrow if there was a tomorrow that looked like a normal day, which right now felt like a theoretical concept. He kept moving. The 35th floor landing had a guard. Logan heard him before he saw him. The particular sound of someone who is bored and trying not to show it, the small shifts of weight, the occasional exhale. He waited on the 36th, back against the wall, until the radio on the guard's belt crackled and the man moved toward the door to respond to whatever was being asked of him. The door opened. The guard stepped half through it. Logan was already moving down the stairs, below the sight line, quiet and low. 34th. 33rd. He didn't stop again until sub-level 1, where he paused in the utility corridor and pulled out his radio. "Still with me?" he said quietly. Vivian's voice came back within seconds. She'd been holding the radio. "Still here. Nothing's changed on this floor. I can hear them in the hall, but they haven't tried the door again." "Good. I'm at sub-level 1. I'm going to sub-level 3. If I lose radio contact in the infrastructure corridor, it's the concrete. Don't assume anything went wrong." "How will I know if something actually goes wrong?" He thought about that for a moment. "Give me 20 minutes. If you haven't heard from me in 20 minutes, Go to the building supervisor's office on this level. Sublevel 1, northwest corner, behind the boiler room. The backup activation panel is behind the fire extinguisher cabinet. It's mounted to the wall, 4 switches in sequence left to right. You hold each one for 3 seconds before moving to the next. 4 switches left to right, 3 seconds each. Don't activate it until you hear from me or until 20 minutes pass. The barriers seal permanently once triggered. Nobody goes in or out after that, including me. A pause. Including you. Including me, he said. So give me the 20 minutes. He heard her breathe. Okay, 20 minutes. He pocketed the radio and went down. Sublevel 2 was familiar ground. He'd already been through it twice tonight. He moved through it quickly, into the infrastructure corridor that connected the building's mechanical systems, a passage so low-ceilinged and narrow that it felt like the building's circulatory system, all pipe and conduit, and the deep hum of systems that kept 47 floors of glass and light and human activity functioning without anyone upstairs ever having to think about them. The passage descended via a half-stair, half-ramp section that had always struck Logan as a structural afterthought, something the 1987 architects had added because the sublevel 3 infrastructure needed access, and they hadn't quite planned for how to provide it elegantly. He went down it carefully because the surface was slightly damp, and the handrail had a loose bracket that he knew about and was not going to trust. Sublevel 3. The infrastructure corridor opened onto a service passage that ran behind the vault's east wall. The passage was approximately 4 feet wide and lit by a single emergency fixture that cast everything in the flat, yellowish light of systems designed for function rather than comfort. Logan pressed himself against the east wall and looked. The vault access corridor was to his left, around a corner. He could hear voices. 2 men. Working. The specific kind of verbal exchange that happened between people doing technical work under pressure. Terse, focused, the kind of conversation where every word had a job. Second partition is still locked. Mercer's override isn't working on the nested protocols. He said it would work. He said a lot of things. Hand me the bypass relay. Logan stayed very still and listened. The bypass relay was a piece of hardware he'd read about, a device used to circumvent biometric secondary authentication. He'd flagged the possibility of such a device being used on Sterling's vault in a report from 8 months ago. The report had been titled Physical Vulnerability Assessment, Sub-Level Infrastructure, and it had been acknowledged via an automated email response from the facilities management system. He moved to the corner and looked around it. 2 men in front of the vault door. One crouched, working on an access panel he'd removed from the wall beside the main entrance. The other standing, watching, with a weapon on a shoulder strap and his full attention on the man crouching. The vault door itself was a 6-inch steel barrier that hadn't been part of the original 1987 construction. It had been installed in 2019 as part of the data security upgrade, and it was, Logan thought, genuinely formidable. Whatever was behind it was worth protecting. Someone had clearly agreed. He needed to reach the manual lockdown panel without being seen or heard by either of these men, and the panel was on the far side of the vault's infrastructure, past the access corridor, through a secondary passage that connected to the building's original hydraulic systems. 40 feet of open ground with 2 armed men between him and it. He looked at the ceiling. The drop ceiling in the sub-level 3 service passage was lower than anywhere else in the building, about 8 feet, and it was the original acoustic tile from 1987, not the modern suspended grid that had replaced it everywhere else. He documented that too, in the infrastructure assessment, as a potential egress route in emergency scenarios. He found the access point, pulled himself up, moved through the ceiling space above the 2 men, his weight distributed carefully across the support structure, his body flat and slow and deliberate. He came down on the other side into the secondary passage. The manual lockdown panel was where the blueprint said it would be, bolted to the concrete wall at the end of the secondary passage, behind a steel door that had a mechanical lock rather than an electronic one. He had a universal key set in his jacket pocket, standard kit for a security professional who dealt with legacy hardware, and the third key he tried worked. The panel was old, genuinely old, 1987 old, the kind of hardware that had been built to last because the people who built it didn't assume it would ever be replaced. 8 switches arranged in 2 rows. A primary activation sequence that was printed on a laminated card tucked into a slot on the panel's face, which Logan thought showed a charming optimism about the survival of documentation. He checked the card against what he remembered from the blueprints he'd studied at the archive. It matched. He pulled out his radio. "Vivian?" She responded immediately, which meant she'd been holding the radio in both hands. "I'm at the primary panel," he said. "I need you to listen carefully. When I activate this, the barriers deploy in sequence. Sub-level 3 first, then 2, then 1. The sequence takes about 90 seconds. Once it starts, it cannot be stopped or reversed. The vault seals completely." "What about the men down here, the ones trying to break into the vault?" "They'll be on the wrong side of the barrier." He looked at the panel. "There's a secondary containment passage that runs parallel to the vault corridor. Once the barriers seal, they won't be able to go up or down. They'll be contained until the tactical teams make entry." "And you?" "I'm in the secondary passage. I'll be on the right side." A pause. He could almost feel her deciding whether to believe that. "Are you sure?" "I know this building," he said. "I've been sure about it for 11 years. He heard something in the pause that followed. Not quite apology, not yet, but the precursor to it. The moment when a person stops defending a position they've already abandoned internally. "Do it," she said. He activated the sequence. The sound that followed was not the dramatic mechanical thunder he imagined most people expected from a building doing something significant. It was quieter than that. A series of deep hydraulic groans traveling through the infrastructure of the building, the sound of massive physical systems waking up after years of dormancy, uncertain at first and then increasingly committed. He felt it in the floor before he heard it properly. A vibration. Then a low, sustained mechanical engagement that traveled up through the walls. From the vault corridor on the other side of the secondary passage, he heard the two men react. What is that?" "The door is moving. The barriers are—" A clatter of equipment, running footsteps. "Go! Go! Move!" The sound of the hydraulic barriers deploying was a clean, final sound. Not loud, just definitive, like a door closing in an empty house. Logan stood in the secondary passage with his hand still on the panel and listened to the building seal itself. Then his radio crackled. "Hayes!" Vivian's voice was different now, tighter. The particular quality of a voice that was controlling something with effort. "There's someone in the hall outside my office. It's not the same rotation. I can hear—" She went quiet. He heard, faintly through the radio, a knock on a door, then a voice muffled from the other side. Logan was already moving back toward the stairs. "Don't open it," he said. "I know." A pause. The voice, "Hayes, I think it's Adrian. Yes, He stopped on the stairwell landing between sub-level 2 and 1. "What's he saying?" "He's saying he's checking on me. He's saying the situation is under control. He sounds—" Another pause. "He sounds completely normal. Like nothing is happening." 9 years, Logan thought. 9 years of being the person who remembered your birthday and your coffee order and the name of your father's cardiologist. 9 years of being so useful and so warm and so completely present that no one thought to look at what was underneath. "Don't open the door," Logan said, "and don't respond. If he believes you can't hear him, he'll move on. If he knows you're in there and you're not opening up, he'll know something's changed." Silence from Vivian's end. He could hear his own breathing and the sound of the building's systems still cycling through their lockdown sequence, and, very faintly, the muffled knock from the other side of Vivian's office door. Then nothing. Footsteps in the hall. Moving away. "He's gone," Vivian said. "Which way?" "I couldn't tell." Her voice steadied. "He knows the barrier's activated. He'll know the vault is sealed. What does he do now?" Logan climbed. Sub-level 1, ground level, the internal stairwell that he'd been using all night. The one that appeared in no security protocol because it was an original construction stairwell that the building's modern systems had classified as secondary and had never monitored with more than a single camera that Logan had noted 3 years ago, had a dead angle of approximately 40 degrees on the north side. He thought about Adrian Mercer, 46 years old. 9 years at the company. COO. The man who had been managing operations while this was built from the inside, piece by piece, maintenance request by maintenance request, fake IT contractor by fake IT contractor, every strange irregularity that Logan had documented, now assembled in his notebook into a picture that was complete and damning and had been available to anyone who asked to see it. Nobody had asked to see it. Adrian Mercer had made sure nobody asked. Logan thought about the specific reports he'd filed that had most directly threatened the operation. The one about the IT contractors. The one about the vault bypass vulnerability. The one about the manual lockdown system's existence. 3 of his 14 reports that would have, if acted upon, made tonight either impossible or significantly more difficult. All 3 had been formally reviewed and dismissed by the same office, the COO's office. He reached the 30th floor on the stairwell and stopped. He was breathing harder than he wanted to be, and his ribs had moved from complaint to argument. He pressed his back against the wall and took 30 seconds to regulate his breathing, because 30 seconds spent now was worth the efficiency it bought him for the next hour. And that was a calculation he'd learned to make a long time ago in environments where the cost of miscalculation was absolute. His radio clicked. "Hayes," Vivian's voice. "There's something you need to know. Talk." "I've been looking through the executive file system on my laptop, local storage not networked. Adrian flagged 3 of your security reports for administrative review. That's standard protocol. Anything flagged goes to secondary review before action is taken." "I know, I got the automated acknowledgments." "The secondary review queue is managed by the COO's office." A pause. "All 3 were logged as reviewed and dismissed within 24 hours. The notation on all 3 is the same. Concerns addressed in implementation updates." Logan said nothing. "That's his handwriting," Vivian said. "Not with emotion exactly. With the flat precision of someone reading a document and recognizing the implications one word at a time. I know his notations. That's him." "Yeah. He read your reports." "Yeah. He dismissed them specifically because they were accurate." "That's how I figure it," Logan said. "He couldn't ignore them and couldn't let anyone else act on them, so he disposed of them in a way that looked procedurally correct." Another pause. Longer. He could hear her doing what people did when they were integrating something large and difficult. Not speaking, not moving away from it, just sitting with the weight of it until they could carry it. 9 years, she said finally. "I know. He sat across from me in my first board meeting. He told me my father would be proud of how I was handling the transition. She stopped herself. "Sorry, that's not useful right now." "It's okay to be angry," Logan said. "I'm not angry," she said, and the way she said it told him she was absolutely furious. "Tell me what you need me to do." He was already thinking through it. Adrian Mercer was somewhere in the building. He was not one of the armed men. Logan was confident of that because the operational profile didn't fit. Mercer was the architect, not the instrument. He'd built the inside access, provided the credentials, arranged the vulnerabilities. The men with weapons were contractors who'd been hired for the extraction. Mercer's role had been to stay clean, to be the grieving COO who cooperated with investigators and expressed appropriate outrage and used the resulting chaos to disappear with his arrangements intact. That plan was now substantially disrupted. The vault was sealed. The extraction team on sublevel 3 was contained. The men on the upper floors still didn't know exactly what had happened. Logan could hear their radio traffic, confused and increasingly agitated, through his earpiece. They knew the barriers had deployed. They didn't know how or from where. Mercer, though. Mercer knew there was only one person in this building who knew the manual lockdown system existed. Mercer was looking for him. Logan needed to find Mercer first, and he needed the one thing that was going to matter more than anything else when the tactical teams finally made entry: evidence. Not Logan's notebook, which was documentation of observations, but not proof of participation. Evidence that connected Mercer to the operational planning, communications, data transfers, something that would hold. "Your laptop," he said. "The one with the local files. Is it networked to anything right now?" "No, I disabled the Wi-Fi when things started. Force of habit. I didn't want anyone accessing it remotely." Good. I need you to pull everything you can find from the COO's shared administrative folder, specifically anything from the last 14 months. Correspondence, file access logs, anything. If Mercer's been using the company system to coordinate this, there may be traces. I know how to find administrative file logs, she said, and there was a brief, sharp edge in her voice that was the first thing she'd said all night that sounded like the woman who'd fired him 2.5 hours ago. He found it oddly reassuring. I know you do, he said. That's why I'm asking you instead of explaining it. A short silence. I'll start pulling. How long do I have? I don't know. Work fast. He moved off the landing into the 30th floor corridor, keeping to the wall. And Vivian, if anyone other than me tries to access that office before the tactical teams are inside the building, you get out through the service door on the north side of the executive suite. It connects to the maintenance corridor. Go straight down, don't stop, get to the 47th Street exit. I know my own building, she said, with that edge again. You know the modern version, he said. The 1987 version has some surprises. The service door on the north side is one of them. A pause. How do you know about that? Blueprints. City Infrastructure Archive, 2021. I took notes. He turned a corner, stopped, listened. Nothing in the immediate corridor. I took a lot of notes about this building. I'm starting to understand that, Vivian said quietly. He kept moving. The 30th floor was where the company's operational management team worked. A floor of open-plan offices and glass-walled meeting rooms that during business hours held maybe 60 people, and right now was empty in the specific way that evacuated spaces were empty. Personal items still on desks, coffee cups half full, a cardigan over the back of a chair, the evidence of lives that had been interrupted mid-motion. He was moving through the open-plan area, using the desk clusters as cover, when he saw him. Adrian Mercer was standing at the east-facing windows, looking down at the police cordon on Fifth Avenue. He was wearing his suit jacket, no tie, hands clasped behind his back. He looked, from a distance of 40 feet, like a man watching a situation with professional concern. He looked exactly like what he'd spent 9 years building, the steady, reliable, operational man who kept everything running and never raised his voice and was always, always in control. Logan stopped. He could take him here. Physically, with what he had on him, without a weapon, he could cross 40 feet and have Mercer restrained before the man processed what was happening. He'd done it in faster timelines against people with significantly more training. But restrained wasn't enough. Restrained was just a man claiming he had nothing to do with anything, and without the evidence on Vivian's laptop confirmed, without something that connected him operationally, a very good lawyer turned restrained into released in 48 hours. He needed Mercer to show his hand. He raised his radio. Mercer, he said. The man at the window went absolutely still. Logan watched him process it. The voice on the emergency channel, a channel that wasn't supposed to be operational, a voice that he recognized and that should not have been inside this building. He watched Mercer's hands come apart from their clasp behind his back. Hayes. His voice was completely even. You came back. Couldn't sleep, Logan said. Walk away from the window, hands where I can see them. Mercer turned slowly. He looked across the open-plan floor and found Logan almost immediately. Not because Logan had made himself visible, but because Mercer was the kind of man who was very good at finding things in rooms. He had the look Logan had seen before on people who were operationally sophisticated and had just encountered an obstacle they hadn't anticipated. Not panic, not anger, but a very rapid, very focused recalculation. You know this doesn't end well for you, Mercer said. He didn't move toward Logan or away from him. He just stood there, which was itself a form of control. You're a former employee who entered private property during an active security incident. Whatever you think you've accomplished tonight, I sealed the vault, Logan said. Your team is contained on sub-level 3. The tactical teams outside are going to be inside this building within the next 20 minutes. And when they get here, Ms. Sterling is going to give them 14 months of administrative file logs that connect your access to every security vulnerability that was exploited tonight. Something moved across Mercer's face. Not much. Just enough. That's circumstantial, he said. Maybe, Logan said. But the bypass relay your team was using on the vault access panel has fingerprints on it. The fake IT contractor invoices that went through your approval queue have account numbers on them. And the 17 security reports I filed that you personally reviewed and dismissed are documented with your notations. He held up the notebook. All of it is in here. Everything I saw, everything I wrote down, every date, every name, every irregularity. 14 months. Mercer looked at the notebook. For a moment, something slipped in his expression. It wasn't the recalculation anymore. It was something rawer than that. The specific look of a man who had built something very carefully and was watching it be unmade, not by force, but by the simple, undeniable existence of a record he'd thought nobody would ever look at. Nobody was supposed to get hurt, Mercer said. The words came out differently from everything else he'd said. Less controlled. The cleaning crew on 22 would probably disagree with your operational planning, Logan said. The woman from accounting with glass in her arm. The executive on 30 who had a panic attack behind a locked door. He kept his voice even, the way you kept your voice even when what you were feeling was something you needed to keep separate from what you needed to do. Two of the people I got out of this building tonight have kids Sophie's age. You know Sophie. You signed my benefits paperwork for 8 years. Mercer didn't say anything. You knew about her tuition. You knew the payment was due. You knew firing me tonight would leave me in a hole I'd be climbing out of for months. Logan paused. Did you push for the timing? Tonight, specifically, so I'd already be gone when it started? A long silence. I didn't plan for you to be collateral, Mercer said finally. The transition to automated security was Vivian's initiative. The timing was the board's decision. He stopped. You just made sure my reports didn't interfere with your schedule, Logan said. Mercer's jaw tightened. Where do we go from here, Zug? He said. You sit down, Logan said. Right where you are, on the floor, hands visible, and you wait for the tactical team. And if I don't? Logan looked at him. He was tired and his ribs hurt, and he'd spent the last 2+ hours climbing through ceilings and steam tunnels and stairwells, and he was 37 years old and not 27, and all of that was true. It was also true that he had spent 11 years in a building learning to be patient, and before that, he had spent years in environments where patience was the difference between coming home and not, and the capacity for it was not something that diminished with age. Then we find out if 11 years of walking security circuits kept me sharp enough, Logan said. I'd rather not. Sit down. Adrian Mercer, COO of Sterling Diamond Group, 9-year veteran, the man who had remembered everyone's birthday and used it precisely, sat down on the carpet of the 30th floor with his hands on his knees and didn't say another word. Logan kept his eyes on him and raised the radio. Vivian? I heard, she said immediately. She'd been listening the whole time. I've got the file logs. I'm still pulling, but I already have his access timestamps on 6 of the vulnerability reports. It's there, Hayes. It's all there. Can you broadcast? Building-wide PA? The legacy system should still have a PA function. It's on the same panel as the emergency radio. A pause. Yes. The switch is labeled. Yes, I have it. Everything you found, broadcasted on the building PA system. Now, before anything else changes, get it into the air where everyone in this building, his people included, can hear exactly what he did. Another pause, shorter. With pleasure, Vivian Sterling said. And 30 seconds later, her voice filled Sterling Tower from the 47th floor to sublevel 3, clear and precise and without a single waver, reading from administrative file logs that told the story of 14 months of careful, patient betrayal in the language of timestamps and access records and approval notations in a familiar handwriting. Logan stood in the 30th floor open plan office with his notebook in his hand and listened to the building hear the truth about the man who had helped run it. Outside, on 5th Avenue, the police cordon was tightening. The tactical teams were receiving updated intelligence from monitoring equipment they'd managed to splice into the building's external communications. Inside, on sublevel 3, 2 men in a sealed passage were hearing a PA broadcast that was telling them, among other things, exactly how thoroughly they'd been set up. On the 30th floor, Adrian Mercer sat on the carpet and stared at a point on the floor, somewhere between his hands and whatever remained of everything he'd built. Logan's radio crackled one more time. The voice on it was not Vivian's. It was one of the operational team. Upper floors. a man whose voice he'd been listening to through the intercom panel for the last hour and a half, the one who'd been coordinating positions and giving timetables. And what the man said, in the flat, stripped-down voice of someone whose plan had just collapsed around him, told Logan that the night was not quite finished. "We still have access to floor 41, the voice said. "Tell the teams to hold. We have a new leverage point." The transmission cut. Logan was already running. Part 4, the last mission. He took the stairs the way he hadn't taken them all night, fast, without the careful pauses at each landing, without the weight distribution and the listening intervals. His ribs made their opinion known immediately, and he overruled them. 11 floors between him and 41, and the man on the radio had said floor 41 with the specific certainty of someone who already had eyes on it, which meant they already had Vivian, or they were about to, and the difference between those two situations was measured in seconds. He went through the 35th floor door because the stairwell above it had a guard position he'd clocked earlier in the night, came out into the open-plan floor, moved through it to the north maintenance corridor, and used the service passage that connected 35 to 38 in the building's original layout, a passage that appeared in no current building schematic, that had been enclosed during the 2003 renovation and effectively ceased to exist in any official record. Logan knew about it because he'd found it in the blueprints. He came out on 38, took the main stairwell from there. Clear, no guard. They'd consolidated their positions in response to the lockdown. He could tell from the radio traffic that their coordination had fractured, and went up to 40, where he stopped because the sound above him had changed. Voices. Close. One of them Vivian's. He pressed against the wall and listened. "Keep moving." A man's voice, not the operational coordinator from the radio, someone else, younger, with the particular flat effect of someone trying to sound controlled when they weren't entirely. 41st floor, now." "I'm moving." Vivian's voice was level in the way that took work to achieve. He could hear the effort in it, the specific quality of a person who had decided that giving anything away was not something she was willing to do. "You don't need to hold my arm." "I'll decide what I need." A door. The stairwell door above him, opening and closing. Logan went up the last 2 flights and came through the 41st floor door in time to see them at the far end of the corridor. A man with a weapon pressed into the middle of Vivian's back, moving her toward the executive suite. The man was big, 6'2" at least, with the kind of physical certainty that came from being the largest person in most rooms. He hadn't heard Logan come through the door because Logan had opened it the way he opened all doors in active situations. Slowly, with control, minimizing the sound to something below the threshold of attention. Logan followed. He was close enough to observe and far enough to be outside peripheral vision, and he stayed there while he assessed. 1 man, 1 hostage. The man's weapon hand was his right, which meant his left was the hand on Vivian's arm, which meant his right side was his strong side, and his left was his engagement side, which told Logan things about geometry that would matter shortly. The man pushed Vivian through the executive suite door. Logan reached it 4 seconds later, held at the threshold, and looked through the narrow gap. The executive suite was large, a reception area, a conference room, Vivian's corner office. The man had taken her to the conference room, which had floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides, and a long table with 12 chairs, and Logan noted 2 entry points. The main door where he was standing, and a service door on the north side that connected to the maintenance corridor he'd told Vivian about. The man had his weapon raised and his radio in his free hand. "This is Reyes," he said into it. "I have Sterling, 41st floor conference room. Tell them to reverse the lockdown or this gets complicated." Static. Then the operational coordinator's voice, strained now in a way it hadn't been an hour ago. "Copy. Hold position." Logan looked at the geometry. 12 feet to Reyes from the main door. Reyes was facing the windows, which meant his back was partially to Logan's entry point. Vivian was to Reyes's left, the engagement side, which was a problem because it put her between Logan's approach angle and Reyes's weapon hand. He needed Reyes to move, or he needed Vivian to move, or he needed something to change in the geometry before he went through that door. He raised his radio very quietly. "Vivian," he said, barely above a breath. "Service door, north wall." He watched through the gap. Vivian didn't look toward the service door. She was smart enough not to look toward something she wasn't supposed to know about. But he saw her register it. A micro shift in her posture, a slight adjustment of weight, the body beginning to orient itself toward an option it had just been given. Reyes had his back to Logan. His radio crackled again. Reyes, what's the status of the lockdown reversal? I'm waiting on confirmation. How long? Working on it. Keep Sterling contained. She's contained. He lowered the radio and looked at Vivian. Sit down. I'd rather stand, Vivian said. That wasn't a suggestion. No, she said. I understand that. She didn't sit down. Logan watched Reyes process this. The specific annoyance of a man whose authority was being declined by someone who didn't appear to be appropriately afraid of him. Reyes took a step toward her, closing the distance, which was what Logan had been waiting for because it moved Reyes's body and changed the geometry. Logan went through the door. He covered 12 feet in the time it took Reyes to register the sound behind him and begin to turn. And the turn was the problem, because it started to bring the weapon around, and Logan's left hand caught the weapon hand at the wrist before the turn completed and his right arm came across and redirected the barrel up and away from Vivian, and then it became a fight for the weapon, and Logan's ribs sent a message that was approximately equivalent to being stabbed. He ignored it. Reyes was stronger than him and fresher than him and didn't have cracked ribs. And all of that was true. And it also didn't matter as much as the fact that Logan had been doing this since before Reyes was old enough to hold the weapon he was currently trying to redirect. The fight for the gun lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds of close quarters leverage and pain and the grunt of physical effort. And then Logan had control of the weapon arm twisted back and up at an angle that made continued resistance a structural question about how much Reyes valued the integrity of his shoulder. Reyes made a sound, stopped resisting. Floor, Logan said. On your stomach. Reyes went down. Logan kept the arm and his knee went to the man's back and he looked up at Vivian, who was standing by the conference table with her hands braced against its surface and her eyes doing something complicated. Are you hurt? He said. No. She looked at his side. Are you? I'll find out later. He looked around the conference room. I need something to restrain him. Vivian pulled the power cable from a laptop on the conference table without a word and handed it to him. He used it. It wasn't elegant, but it was functional, and elegant hadn't been the priority for the last 3 hours. He stood up. He became immediately aware that the message from his ribs had upgraded from stabbing to something more comprehensive, and he put one hand on the conference table for a moment and breathed. Hayes! Vivian had moved to his side, close enough that he could hear the tight, controlled quality of her breathing. Your ribs. They're fine. They're not fine. They're not currently the priority. He straightened. It cost him something. He set it aside. The operational coordinator is still active. We have men on multiple floors who haven't been accounted for. The tactical teams need to make entry, and they need to make it now, while the positions are consolidated, and before anyone in this building does something that can't be undone. How do we tell them? The PA system, but not the evidence this time. He looked at her. I need you to tell them where every guard position is. Everything I've observed tonight, I need to read it to you, and I need you to broadcast it on the PA so the tactical teams can hear it through the building's external speaker feeds. They'll be monitoring. She looked at him. Shia, you mapped the positions while you were moving through the building. All night, he said. It's what I do. Something crossed her face. Not pity. He would have seen pity, would have recognized it. This was different. This was the specific expression of a person who was looking at something they'd had in front of them and hadn't seen. Tell me, she said. I'll broadcast it. They went to the executive suite, to the PA control panel beside the emergency radio cabinet that Vivian had been using all night. He opened his notebook. He read positions, floors, last observed times, estimated personnel counts, weapon profiles, radio frequencies. She repeated none of it back. She just put it on the air, her voice clear and without inflection. A recitation of tactical intelligence delivered over a building-wide public address system to whoever was listening inside and out. When she finished, the building was quiet for a moment in the way buildings got quiet when something had just shifted. Then Reyes's radio, which Logan had taken and set on the conference table, erupted. Multiple voices, overlapping, the coherent operational language of the last 3 hours dissolving into the fragmented communication of a plan that had just been fully exposed. He heard the coordinator's voice twice, once giving a position order, once contradicting it. He heard a man on the 22nd floor say something about the stairwell that told Logan the tactical teams had found an entry point. He heard the word abort used 3 times by 3 different people without any of them agreeing on what aborting meant. "They're breaking down," Vivian said. "Yeah." Logan set the radio down. Once the coordination fractures, the individual decision-making goes towards self-preservation. That's when people make choices they wouldn't make otherwise. He looked at her. "We need to stay on this floor and not move until the tactical teams announce a floor-by-floor clear. That could be 40 minutes. All right." She sat down on the reception area couch. Not elegantly, just heavily, the way people sat when the adrenaline had been running for a long time and the body was presenting its bill. She put her elbows on her knees and her face in her hands for a moment. Logan sat in the chair across from her. He sat carefully because of the ribs, which he was increasingly confident were not just bruised. He put his notebook on his knee and his hands on top of it. For a while, neither of them said anything. It was the first time all night they'd been in the same space without an immediate problem requiring immediate action, and the absence of urgency had a texture to it, a kind of ringing stillness that came after sustained noise. "Sophie," Vivian said from behind her hands. "What?" She lowered her hands. Her face was tired in the way faces got when they'd been performing something for too long. "Your daughter, she's 8? 8.5. She has opinions about the half. Is she, She's with my neighbor. She's fine." He paused. "She's asleep, probably. She doesn't know any of this is happening." Vivian nodded. She looked at the window. The rain had softened, he noticed, at some point in the last hour. It was still there but quieter now, the insistent drumming of earlier reduced to something more like white noise. "Why did you really come back?" she said. "And I mean really, not the answer you gave me before." Logan looked at his notebook. He'd been asked versions of this question at various points in his life. By a commanding officer after a mission in which he'd gone back for someone, the protocol said was unrecoverable. By a therapist he'd seen twice after getting out of the service before deciding the sessions weren't doing what either of them hoped. By his daughter when she was 6 and had asked him why his job was to protect people he didn't know. He'd given different answers each time, depending on what he thought the person actually needed to hear. He thought about what Vivian Sterling actually needed to hear. "I have a daughter," he said, "and I need her to grow up knowing that when things get bad, you don't just drive away because it's not your problem anymore." That's the short version. He turned the notebook over in his hands. "I spent a lot of years doing work that mattered. Then I spent 11 years doing work that people thought didn't matter. And there was a part of me that started to wonder if they were right." He paused. Tonight settled that. Vivian was quiet for a moment. "I was wrong about you," she said. "Yeah. I don't say that lightly. I was specifically, consequentially wrong about you, and people nearly died because of it. And I need you to know that I understand that, not as a prelude to something else. Just because it's true and you deserve to hear it, said plainly." Logan looked at her. She held the look without flinching, which he respected. "I know," he said. "I read your personnel file when I was reviewing staffing," she said. "Not just the security reports. The file. It had your service record attached. Not the classified portions, obviously. Just the dates and designations. And I saw the 11 years here, and I saw the service record, and I thought..." She stopped. "I thought it was sad. I thought, here's a man who used to do something significant, and now he walks circuits in a lobby. And I didn't ask why. I didn't ask what he'd seen or what he knew. I just looked at the job title and made a judgment." "Most people do," Logan said without bitterness. "That's not an excuse." "I know. I'm not offering it as one." He leaned back, which was a mistake with the ribs, and corrected himself. "For what it's worth, and I don't know what it's worth, you put it on the PA. Everything Mercer did. You didn't hesitate." "Of course I didn't hesitate." A lot of people would have. 9 years is a long time to know someone. A lot of people would have needed more proof, more time, more certainty. You heard it, and you put it on the air. Vivian looked at the window again. He was using me, she said. He was using the whole company, the transition, the new AI systems, the dismissals. He positioned himself to benefit from every piece of it. All that time I thought I was driving the company forward, and he was just... She pressed her lips together. He was using my ambition as cover. Smart, Logan said. Genuinely. As an operational matter, it was well constructed. He found the gap between your vision and your knowledge, and he built in it for over a year. He paused. It's also why it's over. You can only build in a gap for so long before someone who knows the building better than you do finds it. She turned to look at him. Was that a metaphor, she said? Little bit, he said. For the first time all night, she did something that wasn't managing a situation or processing information or maintaining composure. She almost smiled. It was small and tired and didn't reach the conclusion of itself, but it was there. Your ribs are broken, she said. Probably not all of them. That's not comforting. It's accurate, he said. Accurate is what I've got. Below them, on floors that had been a combat zone for the last 3 hours, things were changing. They could hear it, or rather feel it, the way you felt shifts in pressure in a building, the particular quality of noise and movement that told you the dynamics of a space had altered. Doors, shouting, but not the purposeful shouting of men executing a plan, the compliance shouting of law enforcement, the specific verbal commands that meant tactical teams had made entry and were working floors. Logan's radio crackled, a voice he didn't recognize, using call signs and floor numbers in the structured cadence of a coordinated breach. They're in, he said. Vivian exhaled, not loudly, just the release of something she'd been holding so long it had become part of how she was sitting. How long before they reach us? 41 is high on the priority list, 20 minutes, maybe less. He looked at her. When they come through that door, hands visible, don't move until they've identified us. They're going to be moving fast, and they're going to be operating on incomplete information, and the last thing we need right now is a misidentification. Understood. She straightened up, pulled her blazer flat, ran one hand through her hair in what appeared to be a reflexive, automatic gesture of composure recovery that he suspected she wasn't entirely aware of doing. He didn't say anything about it. They waited. 12 minutes passed. He tracked them by the building sounds. The floor-by-floor progression of tactical entry is distinctive once you've been on the right side of it, once you know the rhythm and the pauses, and the particular quality of silence that follows when a floor has been cleared and the team has moved on. He was on the 38th floor by his reckoning when Vivian spoke again. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, not diplomatically. I don't really do diplomatically, he said. I've noticed. She folded her hands in her lap. The AI security system, the automation initiative, the decision to eliminate the manual security positions. She paused. Was it the wrong call? Not just the implementation, the fundamental decision. He thought about it. He thought about it genuinely, not as a formality, because she'd asked honestly, and she deserved an honest answer, and it wasn't as simple as the night's events made it look. No, he said. Technology is the right direction. AI-integrated security has real capabilities that a man walking a circuit can't match. Faster response, broader coverage, no fatigue. He turned the notebook over once in his hands. The mistake wasn't the technology. The mistake was assuming the technology made the human knowledge obsolete. They're not the same thing. One is about coverage, the other is about understanding. You need both, or you end up with a system that's very good at seeing what it was designed to see and completely blind to what it wasn't. Vivian was quiet. The gaps I documented, he said, none of them were things the AI system was incapable of addressing. They were things nobody asked the system to address because nobody asked me what I knew. They asked my job title and decided that 11 years of walking this building produced nothing worth having. I asked your job title, she said. You did. And decided the same thing. You did. She nodded slowly, not defensively, just taking it. The manual lockdown system, she said. You found it in 1987 blueprints. City Infrastructure Archive, 2021. Why were you looking at 1987 blueprints? Because I work here, he said. Worked. Because knowing the building I was responsible for felt like the minimum. The 41st floor door came open with a force that communicated that the people coming through it were not taking any chances, and Logan had his hands up and his voice ready before the first tactical officer crossed the threshold, and the next 30 seconds had a particular quality of controlled intensity that anyone who'd been on either side of a tactical entry would recognize. The shout, the visual sweep, the targeting, the command to identify, the verbal response, the hold, the assessment, the stand down. Logan kept his hands up and his voice level and watched the team move through the space with the professional appreciation of someone who'd done similar work in different circumstances. Hayes, he said. Logan Hayes, former building security. This is Vivian Sterling, building owner. We have one restrained individual in the conference room. Male, goes by Reyes, part of the operational crew. Non-compliant earlier, but currently secured. The team leader, a woman with tactical gear and the particular economy of movement that came from doing this repeatedly, looked at him for about 2 seconds before making a decision. Hands down, she said. Stay put. He put his hands down. She looked at his side. You need medical. And after the building's clear, he said. That's not how this works. The building's not clear yet. She looked at him for another second. You're the one who broadcast the position map? Ms. Sterling broadcast it. I gave her the information. The team leader looked at Vivian, back at Logan. She made a small gesture to one of her team members that he interpreted correctly as, keep eyes on them, but they're not threats. We've got 12 of them. 2 on sublevel 3 are contained by what appears to be our engineers describing it as a physical barrier system that predates the building's current infrastructure. Manual hydraulic lockdown, Logan said. Original 1987 construction. Activation panel in the secondary infrastructure passage on sublevel 3. There should be a laminated card on the panel with the deactivation sequence if your team needs to extract the contained individuals. The team leader stared at him. How do you know about a 1987 hydraulic system? He takes notes, Vivian said. Logan held up the notebook. The team leader looked at it. She looked like she had several questions she didn't currently have time for. We'll need that, she said. I know. He held it out. And then, after 11 years of keeping it close, of filling its pages in quiet lobbies at 3 a.m, and on slow afternoons when nothing was happening, and in the infrastructure passages of a building that most people treated as a backdrop to their actual lives, he let it go. The team leader took it with both hands, which he appreciated. We're going to need full statements from both of you. Yes, Logan said. There's a command post established on 5th Avenue, South Side, Mobile Command Unit, Logan said. I could see it from the windows. Third vehicle from the corner. She stopped, looked at him again. Right, yes. Can you walk? He stood up from the chair, which required more visible effort than he would have preferred, but was accomplished without assistance. I can walk, he said. He looked at Vivian. She was already on her feet, holding her shoes in one hand, the same way she'd been holding them when he'd come through her office door 4 hours ago. There was a cut on her chin that had dried and a sleeve that had been torn at some point he hadn't witnessed, and her hair was entirely a different situation from whatever it had been at 8:47 when she'd stood in the lobby and looked at him like a decision that needed to be made. She looked, he thought, like someone who'd been through something and hadn't pretended otherwise. He thought that was probably a reasonable place to start. They walked out of the 41st floor executive suite side by side, past the tactical team working through the space, past the conference room where Reyes was being formally detained, through the reception area where a half-empty coffee cup on the desk had been there since morning and was now evidence of a day that had become something nobody planned. In the stairwell, going down, Vivian said, My first act as CEO was to fire the person who saved this company. Logan said nothing. That's going to be the story, she said. That's what the headline is going to say. Probably, he said. Does that bother you? He thought about it as they descended. The stairwell was full of sound now. Radios, footsteps, the organized noise of a building being reclaimed floor by floor. What bothers me, he said, is that 18 people are going to go home tonight instead of not going home, and the diamonds are still in the gallery, and the financial data is still in the vault, and most of the people who were in this building when it started are going to be okay. He paused on a landing. That part doesn't bother me at all. And the rest? He looked at her. Sophie's tuition is due in 11 days, he said. That part bothers me a little. Vivian Sterling looked at him for a moment with an expression that had several things in it, and then she did something he hadn't seen her do all night. She laughed. Short, tired, real. The kind of laugh that comes out when something hits the exact intersection of terrible and absurd. We'll figure that out, she said. I'm not asking for... I know you're not, she said. That's not why I said it. They went the rest of the way down in silence, and when they reached the lobby, the same marble lobby where 4 hours ago he'd unclipped his badge and walked out without defending himself, it was full of tactical officers and the beginning of the forensic presence that would spend the next 3 days taking the building apart looking for evidence. Logan walked through it without stopping. Outside, the rain had nearly stopped. The air was cold and wet and smelled like wet concrete and exhaust, and the particular smell of New York at 2 a.m, when the streets had been emptied of their usual noise and what remained was the city's baseline, the thing underneath everything else. He stopped on the sidewalk and breathed it. His ribs told him that breathing deeply was an ambitious choice. He did it anyway. Behind him, Sterling Tower stood exactly as it always had, 47 floors of glass and light and marble, and the evidence of enormous amounts of money and ambition and effort, the same building he'd walked into for 11 years and learned by heart, and watched from the inside with the patient attention of a man who understood that the most important things were usually the things nobody thought to look at. He'd left it once tonight, 3 blocks away, with a cold thermos and overdue library books in his back seat. He hadn't gone far. The hospital was quieter than he expected at 3 a.m, which was either a good sign about the city or a bad sign about his sense of what hospitals were supposed to feel like. They put him in a bay in the emergency department, and a resident named Dr. Okafor, who looked approximately 26 years old and had the specific exhaustion of someone 12 hours into a long shift, pressed on his ribs with practiced fingers, and told him what he'd already suspected. 3 cracked, 1 fully fractured. The fractured one is the 4th intercostal on the left. She looked at the X-ray on the screen. You've had rib injuries before. Some, he said. More than some. She looked at him over the screen. You should have come in hours ago. I was busy. She had the expression of someone who had heard variations of this answer many times and had made her peace with the fact that some patients were going to do what they were going to do. We're going to wrap you, give you something for the pain, and I want to keep you overnight for observation. The fractured rib is close enough to the pleural cavity that I want imaging in the morning to confirm there's no... I have a daughter, he said, 8 years old. She doesn't know I'm here, and she's going to wake up at my neighbor's house, and she needs to know where I am before that happens. Dr. Okafor looked at him. Call her now, then you stay overnight. Deal, he said. He called Mrs. Okonkwo from the hospital bay with a paper gown that wasn't quite large enough for his shoulders and a blood pressure cuff still on his left arm. Mrs. Okonkwo answered on the second ring, which meant she hadn't slept, which he'd expected. I'm at Mercy General, he said. I'm fine. Ribs. They want to keep me overnight. A pause. Logan. I know. That child is going to wake up and tell her I'm okay. Tell her I'll be home by lunch. He thought about it. Tell her I'll bring the good donuts. She's going to want to come see you. Tell her the hospital has a rule about kids under 10 in the ER. There was no such rule, but Sophie wouldn't know that, and the last thing he wanted was his daughter sitting in a plastic chair in an emergency bay looking at her father wrapped like something fragile. I'll see her at lunch. Tell her I promise. Mrs. Okonkwo said things that were a mixture of relief and scolding that only someone who'd been genuinely worried could produce, and he took all of it without objection because he'd earned it, and because she'd earned the right to deliver it, and because on some level he needed to hear someone speak to him the way people spoke to someone they were glad was still around. He slept 3 hours, which was more than he expected and less than he needed, and at 7 a.m. he was sitting up in the overnight observation room watching the news coverage on the mounted television with the sound off when Vivian Sterling walked in. She'd changed clothes. She'd gone home at some point between the command post debrief and now, Though she didn't look like someone who'd slept, she was wearing dark slacks and a gray sweater and carrying 2 cups of coffee from the place on the corner that Logan knew charged $4 for a medium and was worth it. And she stood in the doorway for a moment before coming in, like she was giving him the option of pretending he hadn't seen her. He hadn't slept enough to bother with that. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I know." She set one of the cups on the tray beside his bed. "How are the ribs?" "They have opinions." That sounds like a yes to everything being broken. 3 cracked, 1 fractured. I've had worse. She sat in the chair beside the bed, not perched on the edge of it, not the visitor's posture of someone who didn't plan to stay long, but actually sitting in it, the way you sat when you were going to have a real conversation. She wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at the television, where the muted coverage was showing aerial footage of Sterling Tower with the Chiron reading Sterling Tower siege, 18 employees safe, mastermind arrested. "Adrian was processed at 4 this morning," she said. "Federal charges. The U.S. Attorney's Office is handling it because of the financial data component. It crosses into securities fraud and wire fraud territory that takes it federal." She paused. His lawyer was at the precinct within 40 minutes of the arrest, which tells you something about how prepared he was for the possibility of things going wrong. "Prepared people don't plan to get caught," Logan said. "They plan for what happens if they do." 12 other individuals are in custody. The 2 on sublevel 3 were extracted after your tactical team found the deactivation card on the panel. She almost smiled at that. "Your laminated card. Building superintendent put it there in 1987, Logan said. "I just didn't throw it away." Vivian looked at the television for a moment. On the screen, a reporter was standing in front of the building's main entrance with the particular energized composure of someone who'd been live since midnight and was running on adrenaline and the professional commitment to staying vertical. "They're calling you the anonymous security guard," she said. "The networks. The police haven't released your name yet." "Good." She looked at him. "Most people would want—" "I know what most people would want." He picked up the coffee. It was good. The $4 place, definitely. Sophie's going to find out eventually, and I'd rather she find out from me than from a television. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then, "What are you going to tell her?" He thought about it. He thought about Sophie at breakfast in Mrs. Okonkwo's kitchen, eating cereal because she always chose cereal when given the option, reading whatever book was currently absorbing her full attention and ignoring everything else. He thought about her face when she asked questions, the particular focused attention she brought to things she actually wanted to understand. "The truth," he said. Simplified. "People were in trouble and I knew how to help and I helped." "And the part where I fired you 3 hours before it started?" "She doesn't need that part yet," he said. "She's 8. The story for 8 is, Dad went back because people needed help. The rest of it she can have when she's ready for it." Vivian looked at her coffee. "She's going to be extraordinary," she said, "based entirely on the evidence of who raised her." Logan didn't respond to that immediately, the way you didn't respond immediately to something that landed somewhere real. He just sat with it for a moment and let it be what it was. "She already is," he said. The television shifted to a new segment, file footage of Adrian Mercer at some company event, shaking hands, smiling the smile of a man who was very good at rooms. Logan watched it without expression. He'd thought about Mercer a lot in the 3 hours he'd slept, in the incomplete, cycling way you thought about things when your brain was working through them under the surface. Not with anger exactly, something more complicated than anger. 9 years was a long time to perform a version of yourself so consistently that everyone around you built their understanding of you around it. Logan didn't know what Adrian Mercer had originally intended when he'd joined Sterling Group, whether the plan had existed from the beginning or whether it had developed gradually, one small accommodation to ambition at a time, each step small enough to be rationalized until the accumulated distance from wherever he'd started was too large to see clearly. He didn't know, and he found that he didn't particularly want to know, not because the question wasn't interesting, but because the answer wouldn't change anything about the 21 people who'd gone home safe, or the vault that was still sealed, or the ribs that were going to ache for the next 6 weeks. What mattered was the record. The notebook, now in federal evidence. 14 months of observations that had been dismissed, ignored, routed around, and that had ultimately been the thing that ended it, not the technology. Not the multi-million-dollar AI security integration that had been neutralized in the first 20 minutes. A man with a notebook and the stubborn conviction that what he saw and wrote down was worth something. There was something in that worth sitting with. The thing about being underestimated, Logan had learned over a long time, was that it had two edges. The obvious one was the cost. The years of not being heard, the reports that went into unread folders, the job title that made people look at you and see a function rather than a person. That cost was real, and he wasn't going to pretend it wasn't. But the other edge was less obvious, and in certain situations, considerably more useful. When no one is watching you carefully, you can watch everything else. When no one asks what you can know things undisturbed. When the world decides your background, you can learn the background the way no one who's always been foreground ever bothers to. He'd spent 11 years being background. He knew things about that building that its architect didn't know anymore. That knowledge had last night walked 21 people out of a steam tunnel and sealed a billion-dollar vault and kept a company from being hollowed out from the inside. Background, it turned out, was a place where a lot got done. He was thinking about this when Vivian said, "I want to offer you a position." He looked at her. "Chief Global Security Officer," she said. "It's an executive role. It includes a board seat, compensation that I'll put in writing before you leave this hospital, and a meaningful equity stake in Sterling Group." She held his gaze. "I want you to build a security infrastructure for this company that nobody can compromise the way Adrian compromised this one. I want the technology and the human knowledge, both, and I want the person who understands why both matter and how they work together to run it." Logan looked at the television. Mercer's smiling face had been replaced by the aerial shot of the tower again. "Two conditions?" he said. She didn't look surprised. "Tell me." "Every employee who's been flagged for elimination under the automation transition gets a genuine review before any final decision, not a procedural review, an actual conversation with someone who understands what they do and how they do it." He looked at her. "Some of them are going to be redundant. That's fine. But they deserve to have someone look at them the way you didn't look at me. Like there might be something there worth knowing before you decide." Vivian held his gaze. "Done." "What's the second?" "The people who made honest mistakes, bad calls, wrong assessments, things they got wrong in good faith, they get a path to fix it. Not a pass. A path." He paused. "The resident who dismissed my 7th report because Mercer's office had flagged it as reviewed. She did her job as she understood it. She shouldn't lose hers because she trusted the system she was given." Vivian was quiet for a long moment. "You know that's going to make the restructuring harder," she said. "Yes. It's going to take longer and cost more, and some of the board is going to push back." "Yes," he said. "Those are my conditions." She looked at him. He looked back. Outside the hospital window, the sky was doing the thing October skies did when the rain cleared. A hard, clean blue that looked almost aggressive after so many hours of gray, like the weather was overcorrecting. "Done," she said. "Both of them. I'll have legal draft it today." He nodded. "There's one more thing," she said. She reached into her bag and set something on the tray beside his coffee. A check. He looked at it without picking it up. "Sophie's tuition. And 6 months of what your salary should have been, based on what I understand the market rate for someone with your actual qualifications and actual responsibilities was over the last 11 years, which is considerably more than what you were being paid." She put her hand flat on it for a moment, not sliding it toward him, just placing it. "Not charity, correction." Logan looked at the check. He looked at her hand on it. He thought about the tuition payment in 11 days. He thought about the F-150 with the cracked taillight he kept meaning to fix. He thought about Sophie's Wednesday afternoon science club, and the teacher who got it, and the 2 friends who got it, and what it had cost him over the years to maintain that for her, on a salary that had never adequately reflected what he was actually doing. He picked up the check. "Thank you," he said, and meant it without qualification. Vivian nodded. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the television again, and for a while they sat in a hospital room in the early morning with the sound off and the city beginning its day outside the window, and the particular silence between them was the silence of 2 people who had been through something together and were still in the process of understanding what that meant. He was discharged at 11. Dr. Okafor gave him a prescription, a list of things he wasn't supposed to do for 6 weeks, several of which he'd already done, and the look of someone who knew he was going to do them again and had made her peace with it. He took a cab home. He'd asked Mrs. Okonkwo not to tell Sophie he was coming until he was in the elevator, and he could hear, as he came through the apartment door, the sound of running feet in the hallway that meant the warning had arrived approximately 3 seconds before he did. Sophie hit him at about hip height, which was where she always hit him, and he made a sound that was partly from the impact and partly from the ribs and partly from something else entirely, and he put his arms around her and held on. "You're squeezing too hard," she said into his jacket. "I know," he said. He didn't stop. "Mrs. Okonkwo said you were at the hospital." "I was. I'm okay." "She said you hurt your ribs." "3 cracked, 1 fractured. I've had worse." Sophie pulled back and looked up at him with the expression she used when she was determining whether she was being managed. She was 8, and she had his eyes and her mother's jaw and a mind that had been terrifying him with its precision since she was approximately 4 years old. "You were at the building," she said. "The one on the news." "Yeah." "The one where you used to work." "Yeah." She studied him. "You went back." "Yeah." "Why?" He crouched down, which was the wrong thing to do with cracked ribs, and he did it anyway, because this was a conversation that happened at eye level. "Because there were people in there who needed help," he said, "and I knew how to help them." "But they fired you," she said. The directness of it was pure Sophie. No softening, no diplomatic framing, just the fact as she understood it, laid flat on the table. "Yeah, a few hours before." She looked at him for a long moment. She was working through something. He could see it, the processing that happened behind her eyes when she was integrating information and testing it against what she already knew about the world. "That doesn't make sense," she said finally. "Why not?" "Because if they fired you, they didn't want you anymore. So why would you go back to help them?" He thought about how to answer that in a way that was true without being complicated beyond what she needed right now, and then he thought that maybe what she needed right now was the complicated version, because she was Sophie, and Sophie had always been able to carry more than he expected. "Because the people inside weren't the same as the decision," he said. "The people who needed help, the ones who were scared, the ones who were hurt. They didn't fire me. They were just there, and I could help them." He paused. "Somebody makes a bad call. That doesn't mean you walk away from everyone around them. You help the people who need helping. The rest of it you figure out later." She thought about that for a long time, long enough that his knees started to register a complaint alongside his ribs. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay? Okay. That makes sense." She looked at him with the particular serious attention she brought to things she'd decided were important. "Are the people okay?" "Yeah, everyone got out." "Good." She hugged him again, more carefully this time, her arms around his waist instead of his ribs, because she'd processed the information about the ribs and adjusted her behavior accordingly. That was Sophie. She learned things, and then she used them. "You said donuts," she said into his jacket. "I did say donuts." "You didn't bring donuts." "I was in the hospital." "That's an excuse." "That's an accurate description of where I was." She pulled back and looked at him with an expression that was trying not to be amused and not quite succeeding. "Dad." "We can go get donuts," he said. "Give me 10 minutes to change." Mrs. Okonkwo, who had been standing in the hallway doorway through all of this with the expression of a woman who had decided not to interfere in something that was handling itself, caught his eye over Sophie's head and gave him a look that had several things in it: relief, exasperation, warmth, and then went to put the kettle on. He changed. They got donuts. Sophie got the kind with the sprinkles that he'd always thought were excessive, and she'd always defended on aesthetic grounds. And they sat at the kitchen table while the afternoon light came through the windows, and she told him about the book she was reading, which was about marine biology. And he listened and asked questions and ate a glazed one because his ribs had already ruined the morning's restraint budget, and a donut wasn't going to make the difference. It was the most normal 2 hours he'd had in as long as he could remember. In the weeks that followed, normalcy and its opposite took turns. The federal investigation moved quickly, which was unusual, but the evidence was thorough. Both the content of Logan's notebook, which the FBI forensics team apparently spent 3 days working through with the focused appreciation of investigators who had rarely encountered documentation of that quality, and the administrative file logs that Vivian had pulled from local storage and broadcast on the PA system, which were entered into the evidentiary record in their entirety. Adrian Mercer's attorney entered a not guilty plea, and then, 6 weeks later, a guilty plea on 4 of the 7 counts, which the U.S. attorney characterized as a reflection of the overwhelming documentary evidence rather than any crisis of conscience. Logan read the coverage on his phone, sitting in the pickup line at Sophie's school, and then put the phone in his pocket and didn't think about it again that day. The 12 operational crew members were processed separately. Reyes, whose real name turned out to be Daniel Colton, received a sentence that reflected his role as the individual most directly responsible for Vivian's confinement. Logan didn't attend any of the hearings. He gave his deposition, answered the questions asked of him completely and accurately, and then went back to the work of the next thing. The media coverage peaked in the first week and then cycled the way coverage cycled. Intense, then interpretive, then retrospective. Several outlets ran pieces about the anonymous security guard before his name became public, and the pieces had a quality that Logan recognized as the particular sentimentality that attached to stories that confirmed something people wanted to believe about the world. He understood the impulse. He didn't object to it. He just didn't particularly recognize himself in the version of him the coverage produced. The humble hero, the quiet guardian, the man who came back for the people who discarded him. The real version was more specific and less symbolic. The real version had cracked ribs and cold coffee, and a notebook full of maintenance observations, and a daughter who needed donuts and a tuition payment that was due in 11 days. The real version had spent an hour on a stairwell, listening to building sounds and doing arithmetic about guard positions. The real version had been scared, twice, once in the steam tunnel when he'd heard the voices above him and calculated the odds more clearly than he wanted to, and once on the 40th floor landing running toward 41 when he didn't know yet whether he was already too late. The real version was just a man who knew a building and made a decision. But he understood that the story people needed was a little larger than that, and he didn't begrudge them it. His first day back at Sterling Tower was a Monday, 5 weeks after the night of the siege. He'd negotiated his title, Chief Global Security Officer, and his equity position and the board seat, all of it in writing, all of it reviewed by a lawyer Sophie's pediatrician had recommended, because he didn't know any lawyers and had to ask someone. He'd spent the intervening weeks doing the groundwork, meetings with the security infrastructure team, review sessions with the department heads, 3 days at the City Infrastructure Archive, going through the building's original construction documents with more intention than he'd ever had before because now the mandate was explicit rather than personal. He wore the same clothes he always wore. He brought the same thermos, refilled with the same coffee. He had a new notebook, same brand, same size, same black cover. Because the old one was in a federal evidence room in Lower Manhattan, and probably would be for some time. He came in through the main entrance. He hadn't planned it that way. It was just the most direct route from the parking structure, the way it always had been. But he was aware, as he crossed the threshold into the lobby, of what the lobby was, Betts. The same marble floor, the same security desk, the same camera positions he'd calibrated himself, the same view of Fifth Avenue through the glass front that he'd been looking at for 11 years. He heard it before he fully registered what it was. Applause. Not the polite, event-appropriate kind. The kind that started in one corner and spread because it was genuine. The kind where people weren't performing appreciation, but actually feeling it, and the feeling needed somewhere to go. Patricia from Accounts Receivable was near the front, which made sense given that she'd been the one to make the decision in the 22nd floor bullpen, to look at a man who'd come out of a ceiling and decide to trust him. She was clapping with the specific energy of someone who'd been waiting to do this. Beside her, the man who'd had the panic attack behind the filing cabinets, she'd told Logan his name was Dennis, was clapping and had the expression of a person who hadn't quite forgiven himself for the panic attack and was finding something in this moment that helped. There were people Logan recognized and people he didn't. The overnight cleaning crew, junior analysts who'd been heading for the exit when everything started, security staff from the new team, people he hadn't met yet, department heads he'd seen in meetings but not in person. He stood in the middle of the lobby and let it happen. He didn't hold his hands up for quiet. He didn't make a speech. He wasn't built for that, and it wasn't what the moment needed. He just stood there with his thermos and his new notebook and let the room be what it was, because these people had been through something, and the applause wasn't really for him. It was for themselves, for the fact that they were here and okay, and standing in the lobby of a building that had tried to swallow them and hadn't managed it. He was just the occasion. After a moment, he walked to the security desk, set down his thermos, opened the new notebook, looked at the camera feeds, the access log, the schedule for the day. Same routine. Different everything. Vivian was waiting upstairs, he knew. They had a full team meeting at 10 to begin the formal rollout of what he'd been thinking of privately as the hybrid model: technology and human knowledge. Neither one subordinate to the other, each one covering what the other couldn't. He had 40 pages of notes for that meeting and a list of questions he intended to ask out loud in front of everyone. Because one of the things he'd decided in the 5 weeks of groundwork was that the culture that had allowed 14 months of warning signs to go unaddressed wasn't a conspiracy. It was a pattern, and patterns lived in the normal behavior of normal workdays, in the way meetings were structured and questions were fielded, and the implicit hierarchy of whose observations got treated as data and whose got filed under concerns addressed in implementation updates. That was going to change. That was going to change specifically and structurally, not just as an aspiration. He had 40 pages of notes. He also had a meeting with Patricia's department at 2, because he'd asked to spend the first 2 weeks doing something that apparently no executive in the company's recent history had done. Going floor by floor, talking to the people who worked in the building, asking them what they'd noticed, what they'd flagged, what they'd been told wasn't their department. He expected to fill the new notebook by end of the month. He was writing his first notation, the East Freight Elevator, which he wanted a full mechanical review on before the week was out, because it had been making that grinding sound for 6 weeks before the night of the siege, and he had no way of knowing if anyone had finally sent someone to look at it. When he heard footsteps and looked up, Sophie was standing on the other side of the security desk. He'd brought her in on her way to school because she'd asked to see the building, and he'd thought, correctly, as it turned out, that 5 weeks was enough distance to make that okay. She'd been looking around the lobby with the systematic attention she applied to things she wanted to understand, and now she was looking at him, specifically at the notebook, with the expression she'd worn at the kitchen table when he'd explained why he'd gone back. "Is that a new one?" she said, nodding at the notebook. "The old one is with the FBI." "Why?" It had important information in it. She processed this. "Are you going to write everything down again?" "Starting now," he said. She looked around the lobby, at the cameras, at the desk, at the elevators with their marble surrounds, and the art installation in the center of the floor that she'd been examining with forensic interest when he'd found her 2 minutes ago. "You really know this whole building?" she said. "Most of it," he said. "I'm still learning some of it." "Even after 11 years?" "Buildings change," he said. "You keep paying attention." She thought about that in the way she thought about things. Not dismissively, not quickly, but with the full weight of her actual consideration. "Okay," she said, which was what she said when something had made it through her internal evaluation process and been accepted. He wrote the notation about the freight elevator. He looked up at the camera feeds, saw 12 of them on his primary screen, cycling through positions he'd specified in the new protocol, covering the angles he'd documented in the vulnerability reports that were now the foundation of the revised security architecture rather than the contents of an unread folder. He thought about what it meant, not symbolically, not in the way the news coverage wanted it to mean, but practically, in the specific and unglamorous way that things actually meant what they meant. It meant that the next person who walked circuits in this building and noticed something strange would have a direct line to someone who understood why that mattered. It meant that the handwritten observation and the AI system were going to be treated as two parts of the same thing rather than as competing philosophies. It meant that the building's 1987 bones and its 2024 nervous system were finally going to be understood as belonging to the same structure. It meant that the next time someone said I filed a report about this, somebody was going to read it. That was it. That was the whole thing, reduced to its core. Not heroism, not vindication, Just the simple, radical act of paying attention to people who were paying attention. Logan Hayes, former Navy SEAL, former night security guard, current chief global security officer, sat at the desk that had been his desk for 11 years and wrote his second notation of the day and drank his coffee while it was still hot for the first time in longer than he could remember. Sophie said she had to get to school. She hugged him carefully, mindful of the ribs because she'd learned things and she used them. "See you tonight?" she said. 7 o'clock, he said. "I'll make dinner." "Something good?" "Define good." She considered. "Not soup." "That's a low bar." "It's my bar," she said, with the finality of someone who had decided the negotiation was over, and she was gone through the main entrance and into the October morning, her backpack slightly too large for her frame in the way it always was, already reaching into it for whatever book was currently absorbing her full attention. Logan watched her go. Then he looked back at his notebook and the camera feeds and the building around him. 47 floors of glass and marble and human lives and systems both old and new, known and still being learned. He picked up his pen. He paid attention. That was how it had always started, and it was how it would go on. Not because anyone was watching, not because it had been recognized or rewarded or even noticed, but because some people were built a certain way, and that way didn't change when the circumstances changed, and didn't stop when no one was looking, and didn't walk away when things got hard. It just kept going. It wrote things down. It came back when it was needed. And in the end, when the building was counting, and the lights were out, and the people who thought they'd planned for everything discovered there was one thing they'd missed. It was the thing that mattered. It always had been.